Hired to take care of a paraplegic millionaire, he performs a miracle that shocked everyone. It was almost impossible. But before we start the story, tell us in the comments which city you are watching us from. We hope you enjoy the story. The black Bentley's engine purred softly as he drove down a winding road in Switzerland, bordering a lake of crystal-clear water. The golden sun reflected off the tranquil surface of the water, creating a landscape worthy of a painting. Beside him, Victoria Evans, his fiancée, slid her fingers across the screen of her cell phone, absorbed in her messages. The silence inside the car was almost as icy as the snow accumulated on the surrounding mountain peaks. Victoria could never bear to go too long without discussing the future. "We've been together for a year, William." Her voice sounded soft but full of expectation. He continued to look at the road, already anticipating the direction of that conversation. "Is it? And don't you think it's time for us to make our commitment official?" William frowned, feeling his shoulders tense. "Do you really think that a diamond ring, a trip to one of the most expensive places in the world, and a car like that don't count as a commitment?" Victoria snorted, crossing her arms impatiently. "You think gifts buy everything, don't you? If he really cared, we'd already be married." He squeezed the steering wheel harder, without taking his eyes off the road. That conversation had come up before, and he always avoided taking it any further. "Marriage is not a business contract, Victoria." "No, but it requires commitment." She turned her face to face him, waiting for him to say something, but William remained silent. Victoria sighed and went back to checking her cell phone. For a moment, William looked away from the road and watched her. Victoria was perfect in the role. Beautiful, sophisticated, and accustomed to the world of high society. But something inside him hesitated to take the next step. It was at that moment, in this little distraction, that everything happened. The headlights of a truck suddenly appeared on the curve ahead, blinding William. Time seemed to slow down. His heart raced. He turned the steering wheel instinctively, trying to dodge. The tires squealed against the wet asphalt. "William!" Victoria shouted. The Bentley skidded to the wrong side of the track. The sound of the impact was deafening. The world turned. The glass shattered. The metal twisted like paper. Then everything went dark. The white light of the emergency room was oppressive. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, mixed with the muffled sound of voices and machines. William blinked a few times, his mind still trapped in a heavy fog. He tried to move, but a deep pain ran through his body. Then he noticed something strange. He couldn't feel his legs. Panic took hold of him. His fingers gripped the sheet tightly, and his breathing quickened. "Mr. Carter." The doctor's voice was calm, but William felt a pang of anguish in his tone. "I know this is hard to hear, but the impact of the knock caused severe damage to his spine. Unfortunately, the mobility of his legs was permanently compromised. The words echoed in his mind like distant thunder. Paraplegic. He opened his mouth, but not a word came out. How could this be happening? He, such a powerful man, now reduced to a wheelchair? He murmured, his voice hoarse. Victoria was next to him, holding a small makeup mirror, but instead of showing support, his gaze seemed distant. "This is terrible. But maybe we can find an expert, a renowned physiotherapist." William's heart sank. There was no real emotion in his voice, just discomfort. He realized it at that moment. The accident had not only changed his body, he had revealed who really cared about him, and Victoria was not one of those people. Silence hung in the hospital room like an invisible weight. William felt the cold sweat running down his forehead as he tried in vain to move his legs. I couldn't accept that reality. His body had always been a tool of power. He dominated meetings, closed millionaire deals, and walked confidently through exclusive events. What now? All of this had been reduced to a wheelchair. He clenched his fists, refusing to accept the doctor's words. "It cannot be permanent. There must be a mistake." Dr. Carter, a man with a neutral expression and a voice trained to deliver bad news without emotion, stood his ground. "We've done all the tests, Mr. Carter. The impact caused irreversible damage to his spinal cord. We will start a treatment to help you adapt, but—" "No," William interrupted, his voice full of despair. "I'm an active man, doctor. My life depends on my body. I can't live like this." Victoria let out an impatient sigh. "William, please. There is no point in denying reality." He turned to face her, seeking some kind of support, but his gaze met only coldness. She didn't hold his hand. There were no tears in her eyes. On the contrary, his expression was one of discomfort, as if he were there out of obligation and not out of love. "So that's it?" William asked, his voice full of bitterness. "I have a near-fatal accident, and all you can say is to accept reality." Victoria rolled her eyes, putting the makeup mirror in her purse. "What do you want me to say, William? I'm sorry for what happened, but do you think it's easy for me?" The phrase hit William like a blade. "For you?" He let out a humorless laugh. "I lost my legs, Victoria. You missed what?" She looked away, uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm ready for that." The pain of his words was worse than that of the accident itself. William felt his chest tighten as he realized that she was already planning her departure. The doctor cleared his throat, trying to relieve the tension. "Maybe we'd better give Mr. Carter some time to rest. We can continue the conversation tomorrow." Victoria nodded quickly, as if she was waiting for any excuse to get out of there. "Yes, of course. I'll come back later." But William knew she would not return. He watched her leave the room, leaving behind only the smell of her expensive perfume and a bitter sense of abandonment. The following days were a blur. Nurses came and went, testing his response to stimuli he didn't feel. Physical therapists explained exercises that seemed useless, but the worst part was the loneliness. Victoria did not return, no message, no call. Friends who were always present at parties and gala events were now limited to empty messages. "Be well. We're rooting for you." Words tossed to the winds without real concern. William Carter's world had shrunk to the size of a hospital room, and he hated every second of it. One night, as he stared at the ceiling unable to sleep, the door opened softly. He expected to see a nurse, but it was Leonard, his personal assistant. Unlike the others, he didn't look uncomfortable. His gaze was the same as always, practical, objective. "Mr. Carter." William blinked, surprised. "Leonard." "I thought he had abandoned me too." The assistant raised an eyebrow. "My contract doesn't include giving up on you, even if you're acting like an idiot." William let out a dry laugh. Finally, someone who speaks the truth. Leonard walked over, placing an envelope on the table next to the bed. "I know you're feeling lonely, but your company still exists. You may not be in the office, but there are decisions to be made. And if you want advice, stop sinking into this room and start adapting." William narrowed his eyes. "Adapt? For this chair?" Leonard folded his arms. "To your new reality. You can pretend that your life is over, or you can do something with it. The choice is yours." William did not answer. She just stared at the envelope, feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Irritation mixed with a shred of determination. Maybe his life wasn't completely lost, but he would need help to start over. And that's how, unknowingly, the next piece of his story began to fall into place. Time passed slowly inside the hospital room, where William Carter was trapped in his new reality. Days became nights, and nights became days without him feeling any difference. His life, once vibrant and full of control, now boiled down to a bed, a wheelchair, and the overwhelming feeling of helplessness. In the first few days after the accident, William refused to accept the truth. He demanded more tests, questioned the doctors, and insisted that there must be a solution. But the answers were always the same. The damage to the spinal cord was irreversible. It consumed him inside. How could someone who had built his life on independence now depend on others for even the simplest tasks? Pride and anger were his only companions in that cold room. He rejected any motivational talk from the nurses and avoided looking at his own condition. His body was no longer the same, and this thought destroyed him more than any physical pain. But what hurt most was the quiet abandonment of Victoria Evans, his fiancée. For the first few days she would show up at the hospital with an air of superficial concern, but soon her visits became quick, accompanied by increasingly empty excuses. "I have commitments. It's a lot to process, and I'm trying to deal with all this too," were phrases that William heard repeatedly, but that no longer meant anything. Until one day, she just stopped going. No message, no explanation, only silence. William should have been furious. He should have cursed his cowardice, shouted, or thrown something at the wall. But he only felt a deep emptiness. Deep down, he knew Victoria was never really there for him. She was there for the man he was before the accident, for the successful businessman, for the lifestyle he provided. Now that he was no longer the same, she had no reason to stay. But William had no time to grieve for her. Because the biggest battle he faced was not against loneliness but against himself. The next morning, the sound of firm footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. The bedroom door opened, and Leonard Foster, his personal assistant, entered holding a briefcase and a tablet. Unlike the other visitors who had looks of pity or discomfort, Leonard had the same serious professional expression as always. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." William arched an eyebrow. "Good? What's good about being tied to that damn bed?" Leonard ignored the comment and placed the tablet on the table next to him. "The company needs your attention. The board wants to know how it wants to proceed with some important decisions." William let out a bitter laugh. When I was in control, no one dared to make a decision without my approval. Now that I'm here, all of a sudden, does my opinion matter?" Leonard folded his arms, analyzing him for a moment before speaking. "It's not just about business, sir, it's about you. You're letting this situation consume your mind." William gave her a sharp look. "Do you really think it's that simple, Leonard? Think I can just ignore the fact that I'll never walk again?" Leonard kept his composure. "No, sir. But I believe you can choose between two options, give in to self-pity or find a new path. And frankly, I don't see Mr. Carter as someone who accepts defeat so easily." The words struck William in an unexpected way. He wanted to retort. He wanted to say that there was no other way, that his life was over there. But part of him knew that Leonard was right. He couldn't just languish in that room for the rest of his life. "And what is this new path you suggest?" he asked skeptically. Leonard gave a small smile and pulled up a chair. "First, stop treating the wheelchair as a death sentence. Second, accept that you need help moving forward. And third, meet the person who will help you with this." Before William could ask what he was talking about, the door opened again. A woman entered with firm steps and a serene expression. She was Jasmine Hartman, the physical therapist assigned to help him with his recovery. Unlike the doctors and nurses who came and went without showing emotion, there was something different about her. His gaze did not carry pity but a silent confidence, as if he saw something in him that he did not even see. "Mr. Carter, I'm Jasmine, your physical therapist. I'm here to help you work on your mobility and strength." William sighed, already imagining the same motivational conversations he heard from all the other professionals at the hospital. "If you're here to tell me that everything is going to be okay, you can save your time. I've heard it from all sides." Jasmine kept her expression calm. "I'm not here to say that everything will be fine. I'm here to help you deal with reality, no matter how difficult it may be. And for that I need to know if you're willing to give it a try." William laughed, crossing his arms. "What if I'm not?" She tilted her head slightly, as if she was already expecting this answer. "Then, you'll stay right where you are." Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Jasmine didn't try to convince him. She didn't try to appeal to the emotional. He just waited, as if he knew the choice was his, and that bothered William more than any inspirational speech would have bothered him. "What if I try and fail?" he asked, almost in a whisper. Jasmine gave a small smile. "The only real flaw is not trying." The words echoed in William's mind. He had always been driven by success, by the fear of failure. But now the biggest mistake he could make was to stand still. He looked at Leonard, who was watching the scene with interest. Then he looked at Jasmine, who was patiently waiting for his answer. And for the first time since the accident, William made a different choice. "When did we start?" Jasmine smiled slightly and picked up a small notepad. "Right now." She approached and explained how the initial exercises would work. William felt a lump in his throat when he realized how simple and humiliating those activities seemed. Movements that he had previously done without thinking would now require maximum effort. But if he wanted to get his life back, he would need to start from scratch. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment. Maybe his life would never be the same, but that didn't mean it was over. And at that moment, William Carter took his first step, not with his legs, but with something even stronger, his determination. William never thought that a simple arm movement would require so much effort. Time passed in a strange way for him now. Before, his days were marked by meetings, appointments, and important decisions. Now, everything revolved around minimal movements and humiliating challenges. Every exercise Jasmine proposed seemed impossible. Moving his shoulders, strengthening his arms, working on his posture in a wheelchair, everything seemed like a punishment for someone who always had the world at his feet. In the early days, William felt only frustration. His patience, already limited, seemed to run out faster than ever. He wanted results. He wanted to see progress, but all he saw was a broken man in front of a mirror, forced to depend on others for the most basic things. "That's useless, Jasmine. I'll never get better." He threw his hands aside, exhausted. Jasmine, as always, remained calm. "If you believe that, then you're right. But if you decide to believe otherwise, maybe things will start to change." "You don't understand," William exploded. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything in the blink of an eye." Jasmine remained silent for a moment, assessing him with the same calm gaze as always. "What if I told you I know exactly what it's like to lose everything?" William frowned, intrigued. It was the first time Jasmine had shown anything about herself. Until then, she was just the tireless professional who pushed him beyond his limits. "What do you mean by that?" She took a deep breath, as if weighing her words before speaking. "I lost my mother when I was young. We didn't have much. But she taught me that when everything falls apart, what we have left is our inner strength. I could have given up many times, but I chose to continue, because in the end giving up was never an option." The silence that followed was different from the others. This time, William didn't have a sarcastic answer or a sharp argument to throw back at her. Jasmine understood pain in a way that no one else around her did, and that made him think. The days passed, and something began to change. Although small, the advances were real. His body, once motionless and heavy, began to respond. He could move a muscle here, another there. The simple act of being able to lift her leg a little seemed like a miracle. But more than that, his mind was changing. Before, he saw the wheelchair as a prison. Now, he began to see it as a new starting point. He didn't know how far he could go. He didn't know if he would ever walk again. But I knew I couldn't give up before I really tried, and Jasmine noticed this change in him. "It's different, William," she commented in one of the sessions as she adjusted the support bands on her knees. He arched his eyebrow. "Different how?" She smiled slightly. "Before, you looked at me as if I were an obstacle. Now you hear me." William was silent. She was right. Before, he rejected any help. Now, he began to accept it, and that made all the difference. One night, William was alone in his hospital room, watching the city lights through the window. His mind was restless. He took out his cell phone and, without thinking too much, scrolled through the contacts until he found Victoria. His finger hovered over her name for a few seconds. Was it worth trying? Taking a deep breath, he pressed to turn it on. The phone rang a few times until she finally answered. "William?" Her voice sounded hesitant, as if she didn't expect to hear him. "Hi, Victoria." An uncomfortable silence followed. Then she sighed. "I was going to call you. Alone. I just didn't know what to say." He let out a humorless laugh. "How are you?" "Would be a good start." She hesitated, then said, "I know things got complicated, but you need to understand that I'm not a strong person to deal with it." William closed his eyes. He already knew this answer. "Deep down, I always knew. You don't need to say anything else, Victoria. William, please. It's okay," he said, his voice firmer than he expected. "I just needed to confirm what I already knew." And then, without waiting for any more empty excuses, he hung up. For the first time in a long time, he felt that he had closed a chapter of his life, and it didn't hurt as much as he thought it would. The next day, he arrived for the physiotherapy session with a different look. Jasmine noticed this right away. "Did something happen?" she asked as she adjusted the equipment. He shook his head. "I just realized that some things need to be left behind so that others can move on." She smiled. "And does that mean you're ready to try something new?" William took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's see what I'm capable of today." Jasmine adjusted the parallel bars in the center of the room and positioned herself next to him. "Today, I want you to try to stand, even if only for a few seconds." William felt his heart race. Stand. He had not even considered this possibility, but something inside him wanted to try. "What if I fall?" Jasmine looked at him confidently. "Then let's get up and try again." With her help, he adjusted his hands to the bars and forced his arms to raise his body. His muscles trembled, tension rose up his back, and sweat ran down his forehead. His knees felt weak, but something inside him burned with a force he didn't know he had. And then, for a brief moment, he managed to stand up. His feet were not completely on the ground and his body was tense, but he was standing. Emotion took over him before he could even process it. Jasmine smiled proudly, and Leonard, who was watching from the corner of the room, nodded approvingly. "This is just the beginning," she said. William felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The concept of true love has always seemed abstract to William Carter. All his life he saw love as a transaction. You offered something and you got something in return. Your experience with relationships has been shaped by this thought. Beautiful women, lavish events, expensive dinners, it was all part of a carefully calculated game. But now, as he faced his reality, realizing who stayed by his side and who left, he began to understand something that had never occurred to him before. True love demands nothing in return. It does not disappear in the face of difficulties and is not based on appearances or status. Jasmine's constant presence by his side reinforced this new perception. Unlike Victoria, who disappeared when he needed it most, Jasmine had no obligation to be there other than her work as a physiotherapist. But somehow, his dedication went beyond professionalism. In the small gestures, the patience in repeating an exhausting exercise, the care in adjusting his position in the wheelchair, the way she encouraged him to move forward without ever pressuring him, he began to see a form of love he had never experienced before, a love that asked for nothing in return. The days passed, and his relationship with Jasmine continued to evolve. Not in the intense, explosive form of relationships he used to have, but in a more subtle and profound way. There were nights when he would lie awake, reflecting on the conversations they had. Jasmine said little about herself, but when she did, her words carried meaning and purpose. She shared stories about her childhood, about the difficulties she faced to become a physiotherapist, and about how she always believed that life could be better if we were willing to see beyond our own pain. On a rainy afternoon, while William was resting after an exhausting exercise session, he decided to ask something that had been on his mind for days. "Why do you care so much?" Jasmine, who was putting away some materials, looked up at him, a little surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" He sighed, running his hand through his hair. "I'm just another patient. I know that's your job, but you dedicate yourself more than anyone else. It makes me wonder why." She was silent for a moment, as if pondering the answer. Then he finally said, "Because I've seen a lot of people give up, and because I believe that sometimes all one needs to keep going is to know that they are not alone." Those words touched William more than he wanted to admit. He spent his entire life surrounded by people, but he never felt truly accompanied. One day, while they were working on moving the muscles in their legs, Jasmine proposed something unexpected. "I want you to try something new today." He arched his eyebrow. "Aren't the exercises I already do enough?" She smiled. "This time, it's not physical. I want you to think about what you want most for the future, something that goes beyond your recovery." William frowned. I had never thought about it. Until then, his only goal was to walk again. But what next? I don't know. I never stopped to think about it. Jasmine sat next to him, watching him patiently. "Maybe it's time to start. Your life is not just about regaining movement. You still have a lot to live." He was silent, absorbing those words. For years, all that mattered to him was success and gaining more power. But now that I was out of that world, I was beginning to realize that there were much more valuable things. And one of them was right there, next to him. The weeks progressed, and William realized that his connection with Jasmine was not something fleeting. Unlike any other relationship she had, this feeling wasn't based on appearance, status, or money. It was about respect, support, and understanding. Each physiotherapy session was a new learning experience, but not just about her body. He learned about himself, about how to listen to others, about how to trust, about how to value small gestures that once seemed insignificant. Jasmine also seemed to notice this change in him. The arrogant and cold man of before was giving way to someone more human and accessible. One day, after a particularly difficult session, William looked at Jasmine and asked, "Do you believe that all people have someone who completes them?" She smiled softly. "I believe that no one needs to be completed by someone else, but I believe that some people make us see the best in ourselves." He nodded, processing those words. Maybe that's how he felt about her. Jasmine was not someone who filled a void within him. She was someone who made him want to be better, for himself and for others. And for the first time, William realized that this was real love. The cold wind blew against the clinic window as William watched the heavy clouds cover the sky. Winter was approaching, and with it the feeling that something inside him was also changing. He never thought he would be able to see love in a new light. But here he was, feeling something he had never felt before. Jasmine was still by his side, patient and dedicated. His affection was not in grandiose gestures or empty promises, but in the little things. In the way she adjusted the cushions to make him more comfortable, in the way she corrected his posture without making it seem like an obligation, in the way she looked at him not as a broken man, but as someone who still had value. And that made all the difference. On a Sunday afternoon, William sat on the clinic's porch, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Jasmine appeared shortly after, holding 2 mugs of hot tea. "I thought you'd like something to ward off the cold." He accepted the mug with a small smile. "You always seem to know what I need." She sat down next to him, pulling her coat closer to her body to protect herself from the breeze. They were silent for a few moments, just enjoying each other's company. "What do you think about love, Jasmine?" William asked suddenly. She raised her eyebrows, surprised by the question. "Love?" He nodded. "Yes. Do you believe that love is something that happens by chance, or do you think it needs to be cultivated?" It took Jasmine a while to respond. "I believe that true love is not a stroke of luck. It builds itself and strengthens itself over time. The love that remains is not the one that arises on impulse, but the one that resists, even when things get tough." William watched her intently. "So, do you believe that love must be proven by time?" She smiled. "I believe that love reveals itself in difficult moments. When all is well, it is easy to love. But it's when we face challenges that we discover who is really on our side." Her words hit him hard. That was exactly what was happening to him. Victoria had disappeared when he needed it most. But Jasmine, she was there, every day, and in that instant, William understood something that until then he had refused to accept. He loved her. Not in the superficial way he loved in the past. Not based on appearances, status, or convenience, but in a real, solid, unbreakable way. True love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, and he was ready to make that choice. The following week, William made more progress than he expected. His muscles were responding better, and he was already able to support his own weight for a few seconds without needing the full support of the bars. Jasmine was by his side, as always, encouraging him. "You're getting stronger and stronger. If you continue like this, you will soon be able to take the first step." William took a deep breath. The first step. For months, this had been his goal. But now he wanted something more than just walking again. He wanted a new life. He wanted to be a better man. "I wanted to be worthy of the love I was discovering, and he knew exactly how to prove it." The next day, while Jasmine was organizing the physical therapy materials, William took courage and said, "I want to ask you something." She turned to him curiously. "What's wrong?" He took a deep breath, feeling his heart racing. "Do you believe that 2 people can find love at the most unlikely time of their lives?" Jasmine blinked, surprised. But then he smiled softly. "I believe that sometimes love finds us when we least expect it." William nodded, absorbing her words. Then, holding the sidebars for support, he looked at her with determination. "I want to try something new," she frowned. "What?" He swallowed hard and held out his hand to her. "I want to take my first step, but only if it's by your side." Jasmine's gaze softened, and her eyes sparkled with something he had never seen before. She took his hand, and together he took his first step towards a new life. William's first step was much more than a physical breakthrough. In that instant, he realized that his limitation was not only in the legs that did not obey, but also in the way he saw himself. But reality came with force soon after. Walking was not a matter of instant willpower. The human body does not work like that, and as much as he had advanced, he was far from independent again. The following days brought something he didn't expect: discouragement. He thought that after his first step everything would become easier, that his body would simply awaken and carry him forward. But progress was slow, frustratingly slow. Every exercise he did tested not only his muscles but also his patience. "Keep your balance, William. Focus on your core muscles." "Jasmine," he repeated, as he tried to prop himself up on the parallel bars. His body trembled. His arms were on fire from holding so much weight. His legs refused to obey. Then he fell. The impact was not serious, but his pride went to the ground with it. Jasmine rushed to help him, but before she could touch him, he raised his hand. "No." His voice came out hard. I need to get up on my own. She hesitated for a second, then took a step back and crossed her arms. Then get up. William gritted his teeth, resting his hands on the floor and forcing his arms to propel his body. Nothing. He took a deep breath and tried again. It failed again. Frustration consumed him. His chest rose and fell in a panting breath. He wanted to scream. That's ridiculous, he exploded, slamming his hand on the floor. I'll never make it. Jasmine, instead of consoling him, maintained her firm posture. If you keep saying that to yourself, then you'll be right. He looked at her, annoyed. It's no use. I'm not strong enough. She knelt next to him and looked directly into his eyes. William, strength isn't just what your body can do. Strength is what your mind decides to believe. There was a silence between them. Jasmine's face showed no pity, only certainty. William closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. And he tried again. With a huge struggle, he leaned on the parallel bars, forcing his arms. This time he managed to get up. He was back on his feet, not because of a miracle, but because he refused to accept defeat. The weeks passed, and the training became more intense. William was able to stand for longer periods of time and at times was even able to take short steps with support, but he still faced an internal battle. The image he had of himself was in ruins. Before the accident, he was a powerful man, always in control. Now he depended on other people for almost everything, and it devoured him inside. On a frosty morning, while watching the trees outside the clinic, he saw something that caught his eye. A young man, who appeared to be in his early 20s, was sitting in a wheelchair on the other side of the garden. He didn't try to move. He just stared at nothing with a blank stare. Something about that scene bothered William deeply. He approached, maneuvering his own chair until he was close to the boy. First time here? William asked, breaking the silence. The young man didn't look at him. He just shrugged. Yes, William Carter. He held out his hand. The young man hesitated, then shook his hand quickly. Ethan. William analyzed the boy for a few seconds. He exuded the same despair that William felt in the first few weeks. How long since the accident? Ethan looked at him, as if he finally realized he was talking to someone who understood his situation. 3 months, he sighed. Motorcycle. William nodded. What did the doctors say? The young man laughed humorlessly. What they always say. Let's see how your body reacts. It may or may not be reversible, and it will depend on you. William recognized these words, and he recognized the anger in the boy's voice. And have you tried anything? Ethan snorted. Why? To fail? I don't want to delude myself. William was silent for a moment, then he turned his chair to the side and stood up, holding on to the nearby bars. Ethan's eyes widened. Can you walk? Not completely, William admitted, but 3 months ago, I couldn't even move my toes. Ethan watched, absorbing that information. There is still a chance. William looked him straight in the eye. As long as you keep trying, yes. The meeting with Ethan left William thoughtful. Until then, his recovery had been a personal process. Every physiotherapy session, every small achievement, every defeat, everything revolved around his own struggle. But now, for the first time, he has seen his pain reflected in someone else. He didn't want to admit it, but seeing Ethan's despair brought out an uncomfortable truth. How many other people were living the same hell he lived in the first few months? The answer was simple. Many. But the hardest question was, what could he do about it? That same day, during physical therapy, William couldn't get the conversation with Ethan out of his head. As she tried to support the weight of her own body, Jasmine noticed her distraction. Something wrong? She asked, adjusting his posture. He hesitated for a moment, but then replied, I met a boy today. He has just arrived at the clinic. Jasmine nodded, already imagining where this conversation would go. And that affected you? William exhaled heavily. I saw in his eyes the same despair I felt when I first heard that he would never walk again, and I realized that, like me, he is trapped in his own mind. Jasmine looked at him with a discreet smile. And what do you intend to do? He remained silent for a few moments, then sighed. I don't know. But I think I need to do something. In the following days, William found himself paying more attention to the other patients at the rehabilitation center. Before, he was so focused on his own pain that he didn't notice the battles going on around him. He saw men and women facing gigantic challenges, people who have lost partial or total mobility, young and old struggling to relearn how to live within a new reality. Some had family members always by their side, supporting them with patience and affection. Others were completely alone, just like he was at the beginning, and it was at that moment that he made a decision. If he could get back on his feet, then he could help others do the same. One morning, while Ethan was in his first physical therapy session, William approached and sat next to him. Decided to give it a try? Ethan snorted, sweating as he did an arm-strengthening exercise. Let's just say I had no choice. My physiotherapist dragged me here. William smiled. That's how it starts. You come by accident, hate every second of it, and suddenly realize that you don't want to give up anymore. The boy looked at him with an indecipherable countenance. And it was like that with you? William let out a short sigh and crossed his arms. I wanted to give up many times, and to be honest, I almost did it. But someone showed me that as long as I tried, there was still hope. Ethan was silent for a few moments, then nodded slightly. I think I'm starting to understand. William smiled. He knew he couldn't fight the battle for Ethan, but he could walk alongside him. And perhaps this was the true meaning of overcoming. Over the next few months, William not only continued his recovery, but also began helping other patients at the clinic. He shared his story, encouraged those who were at the beginning of the journey, and even followed some sessions to give moral support. That clinic had been a place of suffering for him at first, but now he saw her differently. This was not the place where his life had ended. It was where a new life began. And he wanted to make sure that other people had an equal chance to start over. One day, after another exhausting session, Jasmine called him for a walk in the clinic's garden. He could already walk with the aid of a walker, and each step was a small triumph. I've seen what you've done for the other patients, William, she said as they walked slowly. He smiled. I think I finally understood something I had never considered before. And what would it be? He paused for a moment, leaning on the walker, and looked at her sincerely. I spent my whole life thinking that success was about power and money. But in the end, what really matters is the impact we leave on the lives of others. Jasmine smiled softly. And do you think you've found your true purpose? William was silent for a moment, then nodded. I think I'm getting there. And for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Time passed in a different way for William now. At the beginning of his recovery, the days seemed endless, filled with frustrations and challenges that seemed insurmountable. But something has changed. He still faced obstacles. He still felt the pain. He was still fighting an internal battle to accept himself the way he was now. But for the first time, he had a reason to keep going, and it wasn't just about walking again. In recent weeks, he had engaged with other patients at the rehabilitation center, offering support and sharing his experience. Before, he thought that helping others was just a form of distraction, a way to take the focus off his own pain. But now, he was beginning to realize something much bigger. His experience had value. His words, his falls, his victories, all of these could mean something to someone other than himself. It was Leonard, his assistant and only loyal friend from before the accident, who first pointed out this change. It seems that you finally understand what it means to be truly successful. They were sitting in the garden of the rehabilitation center, where William used to walk short distances with his walker. Leonard had stopped by to visit him, and the two of them watched the movement of the other patients around. William frowned. And what does it mean to be successful in your view? Leonard smiled, crossing his arms. Before, you thought success was about having absolute control, about power, money, status. But now you're learning that real success has more to do with impact than power. William was silent for a few moments. He knew Leonard was right. If you had told me that a year ago, I would have laughed in your face. Leonard let out a short laugh. I know. But honestly, William, I like the man you're becoming now. Those words echoed within him. He had spent his entire life pursuing goals that now seemed insignificant. I always wanted to be the most powerful, the most admired. But what good was all this if, when he needed it most, no one stayed by his side? The exception was Jasmine. Jasmine. It was one of the most important pillars of his transformation. The woman who reached out to him when he couldn't even accept help. That she never gave up on him, even when he did everything to push her away. And now he needed to figure out something even bigger. What would he do with this second chance? One day, while William was finishing one of his sessions, Jasmine appeared holding a tablet. I have something to show you. He arched his eyebrow, curious. What's wrong? She sat next to him, unlocking the screen. The Rehabilitation Center team is organizing an event to raise funds. The idea is to create a support program for patients who do not have the resources to pay for their treatments. William frowned as he analyzed the details on the screen. "And why are you showing me that?" Jasmine smiled sideways. "Because I think you could contribute," he snorted. "Oh, so you want me to write a check and that's it?" She rolled her eyes. "I'm not talking about money, William. I'm talking about your story." He was silent. "The idea is that some people share their experiences to inspire new patients," Jasmine continued. "People who faced enormous challenges and managed to find a way to overcome them." William folded his arms. "And do you think I'm one of those examples?" "You're the definition of that." He looked away. He didn't know if he was ready to expose his flaws and weaknesses, but at the same time, he knew that Jasmine wasn't wrong. "I'm not a motivational speaker, and no one wants you to be. We just want you to be sincere." William took a deep breath. He felt a tightness in his chest just imagining being in front of an audience talking about the worst moment of his life. But something inside him told him that maybe that's exactly what he needed. Maybe that was the next step. And for the first time, he decided it was worth trying. On the night of the event, the hall was packed. People in wheelchairs, physiotherapists, doctors, patients' families, everyone was there, gathered to celebrate stories of overcoming. William was backstage, sitting in his chair, watching the people on stage. He has never had trouble speaking in public before. As a businessman, he dominated meetings and events with ease. But now it was different. He wasn't there to talk about numbers or business strategies. He was there to talk about something much deeper, his own vulnerability. "Are you ready?" Jasmine asked next to him. He closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath. Then he looked at her and nodded. Yes. When his name was announced, he moved to the stage with the aid of his walker. The microphone was positioned at the right height, and he adjusted his posture before starting to speak. There was a brief silence. So he began. "A year ago, if someone had told me that I would be here today, talking to you, I would have laughed. I would have said that this was not part of my plans." He looked at the audience. Many patients looked at him with curiosity, others with hope. The truth is, when I woke up after the accident and heard that I could never walk again, I felt like my life was over. I was a man who controlled everything around me. And suddenly I couldn't even control my own body anymore. There was a respectful silence in the audience. I spent months sinking into anger and despair. But little by little I realized something important. My biggest prison was not the wheelchair. It was my own mind. He paused, watching people's reactions. It was here, in this place, that I learned that my life didn't have to end because of my condition. I learned that I can be strong in other ways, that I can help others find hope. He took a deep breath. And that's why I'm here today. Because if there's one thing I've learned on this journey, it's that none of us need to face this struggle alone. When he finished speaking, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then, the applause began. And William felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not because of money or status, but because for the first time he knew he was on the right track. The applause echoed in the hall, and William was not only proud of the audience's recognition. For the first time he felt truly at peace with himself. Since the accident, he has spent months fighting reality. First, against the idea of being confined to a wheelchair, then against the fear of failure, and finally, against the thought that his life no longer had purpose. But now, as he came down from the stage with his walker, something inside him had changed. He wasn't just surviving. He was living. Jasmine met him backstage, a satisfied smile on her face. "I don't think I've ever seen you so comfortable on a stage before," William laughed. "This time I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just being myself." She crossed her arms and tilted her head, assessing him. "And how was that?" He took a deep breath, looking at his own hands. "Liberator." Jasmine smiled softly. "I knew you were ready. I just had to believe that too." William looked at her fondly. She always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. And now he didn't want to waste time postponing life anymore. With the success of the charity, William felt that rehabilitation was no longer just about his own physical progress. He began to be actively involved in the center's projects, helping to organize new events, fundraising, and emotional support for patients who arrived unmotivated just as he had arrived months earlier. One afternoon, while following one of Ethan's physical therapy sessions, the young man looked at him with a different twinkle in his eye. "I didn't tell you before, but it was because of you that I decided to keep trying." William blinked, surprised. "My cause?" Ethan nodded. "At first I thought I would never get better, but then I saw you. I saw that even after everything you've been through, you didn't give up. It made me think that maybe I could fight too." The boy's words struck William in an unexpected way. He always wanted to leave a legacy in the world. "In the past, I thought it meant building a business empire and being remembered as a powerful tycoon. But now he realized that his true legacy was not in the money he accumulated, but in the lives he touched." A few weeks after the event, Leonard arranged a meeting with William to discuss the future of his company. "The council is restless, William. They want to know when or if you'll take control again." William looked out the window of the clinic where patients had their sessions outdoors. He thought for a long moment before answering. "You know, Leonard, before the accident, my life was like that. Those deals, those meetings, I defined myself by that." Leonard nodded. "What now?" "How do you define yourself?" William smiled sideways. "Now, I'm a man who has finally understood what's really important." Leonard watched intently. "Does that mean you don't intend to come back?" William took a deep breath. "It means that my life can no longer revolve around that. I may still be involved, but I can't let it consume me again. I found something that makes me feel alive, something that really makes a difference." Leonard was silent for a moment, then smiled. "Then maybe it's time to put the past behind us and build something new." And William knew he was right. Spring arrived, and the mild climate brought with it renewed energy. William spent the last few months dedicating himself not only to his recovery, but also to the new projects he helped organize. The rehabilitation center had already become more than a place of treatment. For him, it was a home, but there was one last challenge he still had to face. His first step had been taken alongside Jasmine, but now he wanted to do something on his own. On a sunny morning, he met with Jasmine and Leonard in the clinic's garden. "What are we doing here?" Leonard asked, crossing his arms. William smiled. "I'm going to take my first step without support." The two looked at him surprised. "William, are you sure?" Jasmine asked, worried. He nodded. "I need this. I need to prove to myself that I am capable." Jasmine took a deep breath and nodded. He adjusted his posture, feeling every muscle in his body prepare. His knees were shaking slightly, but he kept his breathing controlled. Then he let go of the walker. The silence around was total. He could hear only his own breathing and the racing beating of his heart. With immense effort, he moved his right leg, then the left, one step, then another, and then he was walking alone. Tears streamed down Jasmine's face as she covered her mouth with her hands. Leonard clapped slowly, a genuine smile on his face. William stopped, exhausted, but with a smile he hadn't felt in a long time. I did it. He didn't need anything else. He no longer needed the approval of others, nor the validation of a world that had always seen him as a powerful man. Now he knew who he really was, and that was enough. The days that followed the moment William took his first steps alone were intense. He had been through countless challenges since the accident, but that simple act marked the true end of his old life and the beginning of a new one. News of his achievement spread quickly through the rehabilitation center. Patients and staff commented on her determination, inspiring others to believe that recovery was possible. Even those who had never spoken to him before began to approach him to ask about his journey. But despite the celebrations and words of encouragement, William was not satisfied with his own recovery alone. Now that he knew the impact his story could make, he wanted to go further. A week after their walk without support, William gathered Jasmine and Leonard in the clinic's garden. He knew he needed to discuss something important. "I want to open my own rehabilitation center." Leonard widened his eyes in surprise. Jasmine smiled sideways, as if she already knew this would happen. "Are you sure about that?" Leonard asked. William nodded without hesitation. For the first time, yes, he had spent his entire life building a financial empire, always looking to grow his business. But now his goal was different. He wanted to build something that would really make a difference. "This place gave me a second chance. I want to offer this to other people. I want to create a space where no one has to face this struggle alone." Jasmine crossed her arms, thoughtful. "You know it's going to be a lot of work, right? It's not just about signing papers and opening doors. You'll need a team, a space, a structure. William smiled. I spent months relearning how to walk. I think I'm ready to take on any challenge. Leonard let out a short laugh. Well, if anyone can make it happen, it's you. William looked at Jasmine. And I want you to be in this with me. She blinked, surprised. What? I want you to be my partner in this project. You taught me everything I know about rehab. If it weren't for you, I would never have made it this far. So no one better to be by my side in this. Jasmine was silent for a few moments. William couldn't decipher her expression. Then she took a deep breath and smiled. I accept, but on one condition. Which one? That this place is not just a rehabilitation center. I want it to be a space for all people facing physical or emotional challenges, a place where they can find the strength to move forward. William nodded, satisfied. Closed. And so, the next chapter of his life began to be written. With the decision made, William took action. In the following months, he dedicated himself fully to the project. He used his contacts to find a suitable location, brought in experienced professionals, and brought patients from the rehabilitation center, where he was to help him build a truly welcoming space. Leonard took over the bureaucratic part, making sure everything was done right. Jasmine was responsible for the structure of the rehabilitation programs, developing innovative methods to serve each patient in a personalized way. But William wanted more than just a physical recovery center. He wanted to change people's mindsets about rehabilitation. I knew that many saw the condition of someone in a wheelchair as an end-of-life sentence. He himself had thought so at first. But now, she knew that the reality was very different. So, in addition to traditional treatments, the new center offered lectures, psychological support, and programs for reintegration into the labor market. William wanted to make sure that no one left without a path to follow. And little by little, that idea that seemed like just a dream began to take shape. 6 months later, the rehabilitation center was ready. The inauguration event brought together patients, family members, medical professionals, and even William's former colleagues from the business world. He didn't expect to see so many people there, but the impact his story had made was greater than he imagined. When it was his turn to speak, William took the stage without a walker, relying only on his own strength. Silence took over the hall as he looked at the people there. He took a deep breath and began. A little over a year ago, my life changed forever, and at that moment I thought all was lost. He looked at the audience and saw Ethan sitting next to other patients. He saw Jasmine looking at him with pride. But I was wrong. I thought my biggest loss was mobility. But in fact, what I needed to recover most was something that you don't see in the mirror, the will to move on. That night was unforgettable, and at the end of the event, as William watched the illuminated building in front of him, he knew that it had all been worth it. His past was still part of him, but it was no longer what defined who he was. He was no longer a man stuck with what he lost. Now it was a man building something new, and that was the biggest victory of all. Months after opening, William's Rehabilitation Center was operating at full speed. The place, which started as a dream, turned into a refuge for dozens of people looking for a second chance. He spent a good part of his days there, talking to patients, monitoring progress and helping whenever possible. But most of all, he was learning to live in a completely new way. Unlike in the past, where his routine was taken up by endless meetings and profit-driven businesses, now he saw the value in every small victory of the people around him. One of these moments happened on a sunny afternoon. William was in the courtyard of the center, watching some patients exercise when Ethan approached, limping slightly but walking without support. "Hey, boss," the young man called, smiling. William raised his eyebrows in surprise. "So you're walking?" Ethan laughed and opened his arms. "I'm not a sprinter yet, but I think I can officially consider myself a survivor." They both laughed, and William tapped the boy on the shoulder proudly. "You know, Ethan, when I first met you, you were a stubborn, angry kid. Look who's talking," Ethan countered, amused. William let out a sincere laugh. "Fair enough. But seeing where you are now makes me realize that all the effort is worth it." Ethan smiled sideways. "Does that mean I can finally stop physical therapy?" William folded his arms. "Definitely not." The two laughed again, and William realized that somehow Ethan had become a younger brother to him. It was funny to think about it. Before, he would never have imagined that someone like Ethan would be a part of his life. but now he couldn't imagine his journey without the young man by his side. While William dedicated himself to the center, his relationship with Jasmine also evolved. From the beginning, there was something different between them, but now, without the barriers he created himself, the feelings became impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long day at work, the two of them were sitting on the terrace of the center, watching the lights of the city. "You know what's funny?" William asked, breaking the silence. "What?" He smiled. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here sitting next to you, talking about rehab and new opportunities, I would have called that person crazy." Jasmine smiled slightly. "What now?" William looked her in the eye without hesitation. "Now, I know that this has always been the right way. I just had to lose everything to see that." She tilted her head, analyzing him. "And do you still feel like you've lost everything?" William was silent for a moment, reflecting. Then he shook his head. "No. In fact, I think I won more than I ever imagined." Jasmine smiled softly and looked up at the starry sky. William watched her for a moment before taking courage. He took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Jasmine didn't back down. On the contrary, he shook his hand lightly, confirming what he already knew. "I know I'm not a perfect man, but I know I've never been as sure of anything in my life as I am now." Jasmine looked at him, and for the first time, he saw her answer before she even said anything. "Then stop talking and kiss me soon," and he didn't need another invitation. The years passed, and the rehabilitation center founded by William became one of the most respected in the country. People from different parts of the world sought out the place, not only for the treatment, but for the philosophy of overcoming that it created. He and Jasmine continued to work together, not only as partners, but also as life companions. Ethan, now a more mature man, became one of the center's instructors, helping others in the same way he was helped. William did not return to the corporate world. He discovered that his true fulfillment was not in the business, but in the lives he helped transform. And on a quiet afternoon, as he walked through the courtyard of the rehabilitation center, he paused for a moment and looked around. Patients are smiling, people helping each other, employees are dedicating themselves. All that was the result of his struggle, and he realized that despite everything, life gave him a new chance, and he enjoyed every second of it. William's story is a reminder that life doesn't always follow the plans we make. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you liked it, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. See you in the next